listening and speaking course. Today we are going to review how to improve your listening and speaking skills and things you need to know in order to get better and be prepared for your IELTS test. And now we are going to begin our class by reviewing listening test tips. Remember, before taking your test, you have to make sure you are ready to listen. The moment you hear the words Section 1, Section 2, etc., you should be prepared and ready to listen for the instructions that are given to you. Listen for details about the information contained in the passage as well. For example, questions such as who, what, where, when, and why. Also, you have to keep in mind that learning how to predict is a very important strategy during your test. There are many types of IELTS listening question tasks, and make sure to know how to complete them before taking the test. Without this knowledge, it's going to be really challenging for you to complete listening task. In the listening test, you'll use 4 skills at once. You need to be able to do the following things: read the instructions and questions, listen for general information and specific information as well. And also you have to write the answers as you listen for the answers to the questions that follow. Remember, before each listening passage in the time given to you, look at each section in the test booklet and try to predict information in situations that you will hear. Knowing how to predict the number of people involved and what they might be doing or planning will ensure that you'll do great on this test and you'll answer most of the questions correctly. Also, try to predict what they might say and what the words they might use by reading the titles and reading the words you have on your handout. And here's a note that you need to remember, that in order to score well in the listening test, you need to develop the ability to think ahead. Learning how to predict will form the correct word association and help you hear the right words in the recording. So predicting is one of the most important things when it comes to your listening that can help you succeed and pass IELTS listening test successfully. And now let's discuss things you should keep in mind while taking your listening test. Remember that section 1 of the listening test is the easiest of the 4 sections. Also, each section becomes progressively more difficult. So section 1 is the easiest, section 2 is a little bit harder, and sections 3 and 4 are the most challenging ones. Also, if your English level is average or above average, you should have little trouble completing section 1. If you are seriously considering to study in an English-speaking country, you should be able to score 100 in this section. However, it is common to make mistakes in the section due to nervousness or lack of preparation. So make sure you practice in advance and you feel rested while you're taking your test. It is very important, and it really determines how focused you can stay while listening to the recordings. Practice listening for general understanding of the situation and for the specific keywords and phrases. Make sure to complete at least 3 practice tests before taking your IELTS exam. That will ensure you are prepared and you know exactly what to do while taking your test. Remember that the answers are often stressed and repeated. If you listen carefully to the recording, you'll notice that important information which almost always stressed and quite often repeated 2 or even 3 times. So when I say stressed, I mean the speaker says these words a little bit louder. He or she tries to emphasize these words. And a lot of time these words are actually correct answers. So let's take a look at our following example. So here we have conversation between George, someone named George, and clerk. So as you see, there are a couple of times you see how the word Paris was highlighted, so it's written in bold, and in this case Paris is a correct answer. IELTS Listening and Speaking. How to improve your listening and speaking skills, Part 2. And now we're going to review one of the most important points in your IELTS listening test. It's knowing when to move on to the next section. In the IELTS listening test, each section is considered separately, and you are not being told when the next question in the section comes. When the passage is being played, you should be aware of the content of the next question as you listen for the answer to the current question. Also, if you don't think ahead to the next question and miss an answer, you might be unable to keep up with the recording. You could still be waiting for an answer that has already been given, so make sure you examine what type of questions you have and you are prepared yourself in advance and know the content of the upcoming question. In the listening test, you are going to hear various signal phrases and words. These signal phrases and words can help you determine when to move on to the next question. They might sound like the following phrases below. And now we will, before I move on to, and what about, so these are type of phrases you might have. As you see, we have different expressions. This is just the one example that we have, and you have to make sure you can recognize them because they will help you determine when you need to move on to the next question. Remember, usually when an English speaker changes topic, his or her voice will lift considerably in pitch and in level of excitement. So that's a very important strategy to remember as well. And now we are going to review other important tips that you should remember during your test. You have to remember that when you're listening for the speaker, he or she can change his or her mind. The speaker often changes his or her mind and makes a correction before giving an answer that you need to write down in your answer sheet. So here we have an example from the authentic IELTS test. So as you see, you have a clerk saying a couple of sentences. So for example, he or she would say something like this: George, and you see the spelling of the last name. Good. Now, nationality, French. No, wait a minute, it is a Swiss passport. So as you see, the speaker in this case, he actually changed his mind from French, he went to Swiss passport. So you have to be very careful what kind of answer you can write down. So for example, you'll be given, for example, nationality and then blank. Then you would have to fill out with the right nationality here. Is that Swedish or French? In this case, that should be Swedish, correct response. On this slide, we are going to review how to practice for listening gap fills. Remember, gap fills tasks are the most difficult of the IELTS listening tasks. Your answer should be grammatically correct within the given sentences. So practice listening to the news either on the TV or radio and try to complete the chart below. As you see, we have a chart, and this is a good practice you can have at home. So for example, you can write down items and maybe just gonna be one item, or maybe you want to practice more, so you can write down 3 or 4 items a day. So for example, here we have news item 1, and you have the following questions: what, where, when, who, how, and why. So listen to the news at home and then identify what happened, what the topic of the listening or the news, where it happened, for example, where it took a place, when, time of the day, maybe it's in the morning, in the evening, or you can also write down specific time, who did it, how it happened, and what's the reason for this situation. So this is a good way for you to practice your listening for specific and general information. IELTS Listening and Speaking. How to improve your listening and speaking skills. Part 3. And now we are going to talk about speaking test tips and things you need to keep in mind before taking your test. First of all, remember to be prepared and try to relax. You should be on time and be prepared for your interview. Remember to have your passport with you to show the examiner for your identification. Remember also that this is a formal interview, not an ordinary conversation. So don't show up wearing flip-flops and your shorts. So make sure you are looking formal as well. The examiner cannot talk to you freely, so remember, she must follow a strict set of questions that were prepared in advance. Do not worry about the interview being recorded. It's a totally normal process. They have to be able to go back and listen to your speaking again. And remember, first impression is very important. You should always reply with an answer that is informative and interesting. And your body language is also important too. With your body language, aim to create relaxed and intelligent impression. So following these tips can be very helpful for you to attain a high score when you come to your interview. Be willing to yes or no to a question and wait for the next one. Remember, you are being tested for your speaking skill, so you have to make sure to speak as much as possible. Also, the examiner is there to guide you and will do as little of the talking as possible. So you should aim to speak 75 to 80% of the time. Also, be sensitive about some topics and avoid strong opinions, especially when you talk about government, religion, or related topics. You don't need to be 100% honest about everything, remember that too. The examiner just wants to hear how you speak English. And remember to be positive, interested, and respectful during your speaking test. In the IELTS exam, you'll be asked various questions. You have to make sure that you make good use of the questions that are being asked from you. If the situation was a regular conversation, it would be perfectly fine to say yes, no, okay, maybe, but this is not a regular conversation, but a formal IELTS interview. So in this case, if the examiner asks you the following questions such as where do you come from, what's your favorite hobby, you have to make sure your response is complete. So for example, if your examiner will ask you where do you come from and you say Germany, it's not a great idea. So you have to make sure you give a complete response. For example, Germany, Hamburg, it is a a very busy city with a population over 1.5 million people. But actually, I live about 15 kilometers out of town on a small farm. As you see, this answer gives a lot of information and it's very complete, so that lets examiner to test your speaking ability, and that's what you should try to do. And now we are going to review things you should do and should not do during your IELTS exam. Things you should do are feeling relaxed, remaining in control right up until the moment you leave the interview room. And also it's a good idea if you shake your hand confidently, but you have to make sure that you are being invited to do so. And after that, thank your examiner for his or her time. You can simply say something like, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed talking with you. And that's a good idea. Do not do the following things. For example, telling the examiner how relieved you are that the test is over. So you shouldn't do that. It's not a good idea. And also do not overdo your friendliness at the end. Be glad you did your best, smile, and leave the room. And also the most important point is not asking the examiner for your band score. He or she is unable to tell you that. So just be polite and friendly, but don't overdo your friendliness. As you remember, just thank your examiner, be positive, energetic, and try your best.